Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, you know what? They were so predictive that where we are nowadays, they did. They got it right. And it is really our issue to deal with in so many different ways. Today's program, I want to take a hard look at all the attacks on our liberties and using the terminology of Bastiat is legal plunder based on his book, The Law, which I highly recommend that each of you read if you have not read it already. Again, most of the time here on this program, I am talking to the choir. So many of you may have already acquired his book, The Law, and have read it. If you have, I highly recommend that you go back and look at it again. And in looking at that book, The Law, one of the key elements that he speaks to is legal plunder. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about in relationship to even Republicanism and the idea that the Republican Party in modern America, for the most part, and I can attest, in fact, to the Republican Party in Ohio in particular, is all about legal plunder. And let me kind of take you down that path real quick, and then we'll get into republicanism. But you see, the Republican Party in the state of Ohio, the chairman of the state party, has illegally, in the opinion of most people, taken and given over $600,000 to our present governor DeWine's campaign without the authority of the finance committee or the authority of the central committee. But he says that it is his executive discretion to do that. Well, in my mind, even if it is his discretion and his discretion has credence, then that is legal plunder when the rest of the Republicans don't know that that's what he did or what he gave to other major persons in Ohio. Uh, Governor DeWine is running again, but he is not the candidate of choice yet. He has not been endorsed yet. And to give $600,000 to an unendorsed candidate, I think is, as Bastiat would say, legal plunder. But we will get into that a little bit further. And the fact that I titled this program that Republicanism is not the Republican Party. And in fact, what we're seeing when we look at founders' intent for republicanism, it is very clear, it's very defined. And what we're seeing is that other than, I have to say it, other than what Donald Trump was doing and what he is continuing to do, the Republican Party is nothing but another conscript to plunder, especially at the national level in what we saw with the Senate taking and buying into this debacle, this travesty of a transportation bill, of an infrastructure bill that the Republicans, 19, I believe it is, Republicans, including one of our Republican senator here in Ohio, signed off on it and are giving, again, legal plunder. They're thieves, they're criminals. By Bastiat's definition, read the law by Bastiat, and we'll clearly see. And we'll quote some of Bastiat as we go along, but what we have is a party that is plundering its own members and then allowing those elected within the context of that party, those that end up being elected, especially at the federal level and even at the state level, to be legal criminals. Legal criminals. It Bastiat lays it out. I'm not just saying this. I mean, I can really get like a lot of the other pundits out there just driving on the emotional side of it. But what I want is always to look into the mirrors of history so that we understand what has been predicted. What are the principles? What are the truths? What has education ripped out of the very hearts and minds of what it means to maintain this republic? I spoke to you about that on maintaining the republic, in the last couple of programs. And remember, it goes to Franklin and what Ben Franklin said, what type of government we have, a republic, if you, you, every one of you can keep it. And that means we have to be engaged. So let's see. Another thing that I want to touch on, and whether we actually get to it or not, is some of what has been going on here in my county with the health director, who I guess has already had his marching orders because an article actually validates what he said in a personal post, and that is healthcare insurance companies charge the unvaccinated higher premiums. That's a question. Can they? What about life insurers? So this health director in our county, in one of his personal posts, put up the whole idea that, well, if you don't get the vaccine, which I call the shot, it's actually causing more problems than what it's worth, that if you don't get that, then your health insurance rates should go up, or you shouldn't even get health insurance at all. That's what the director said. Now, what I want everyone to understand is that in Ohio, and I haven't looked at all the various states, I guess that's a challenge for me, is to look at the Bill of Rights in all of the other state constitutions, especially those of the first 13 states in America, and as well as all of us other states that then were guaranteed what? A Republican form of government. And we're going to talk about that. What is Republicanism? But again, in the Ohio Constitution, I would challenge those in Ohio that are listening to this to pull out Article 1 and go through the Bill of Rights, understand that, and to clearly go all the way to the end of the Bill of Rights, and I have that printed out in front of me, to Section 21. And Section 21 is titled The Preservation of the Freedom to Choose Health Care and Health Care Coverage. The freedom to choose. And it goes on to say, no federal, state, or local law or rule shall compel, directly or indirectly, any person, employer, or healthcare provider to participate in a healthcare system. No federal, state, or local law or rule shall prohibit the purchase or sale of healthcare or healthcare insurance. And then it goes on. Fundamentally, what is being said here is that we, the individuals, have a right to choose our health care and our health care insurance. Now, this is going to become extremely difficult, especially if you go and we start looking at this whole idea, and the articles are there in the references at none other over my shoulder, SamuelAdamsReturns.net, that if all of these various companies, these healthcare companies, become the Nazis for the federal government, ladies and gentlemen, we continue to have a major meltdown problem in what it means for the securing of our liberties. And again, this is just not me just pontificating whatsoever. It is foundationally fundamental based on the design of republicanism in what our founders intended on how this Constitution should be executed and how our rights should be secured. Now, we're down to just under 4 minutes. So I'll start really delving into republicanism and that the Republican Party, especially that in Ohio, is not securing the fundamental truths on republicanism for a constitutional republic. They're not doing it. They're all over into their party spirit stuff, which George Washington, in his farewell address, warned against. So, what do we have to do in wrapping this section up? First off, I will bring your attention once again to my favorite books, if you will, is that of the Founders Constitution. For those on the radio and on the podcast sphere, this is the books I'm holding up. You'll have to go to Rumble in particular because I think this one will get cleaned off of YouTube. But you have to go to Rumble to watch the program if you want to see my smiling face and also the books. The references are all at samueladamsreturns.net. So what we're going to go through today is in here is the chapter 2, which is on the popular basis of political authority. Popular basis of political authority. And then we're also going to go into none other than, let's see here, it is chapter 4 on Republican government. And we're going to go through the introduction. We'll look at some of John Adams' thoughts on government, a little bit on Thomas Jefferson. We may look into a few other of the letters that we really won't have time to. But once again, the references have the links to these specific chapters, at least to the list of all of the writings that bring together those thoughts on what is the popular basis of political authority. Populism. Populism is what drives our political authority. And then republicanism is, and I'll tease you with this right now, republicanism is secured by none other, drum roll, popularism. So that is what works. That is what Trump has been calling America back to, and it was in his inaugural speech, was to return the government to the people. But here in this last minute, I have to tell you, the sickening and sad commentary on the whole thing is that the people do not know how to self-govern. And instead, they are helping the elitists, they are helping the enemies of populism, and the enemies of republicanism to destroy our Constitution. And with that, they're dividing families. They're causing havoc. And they're willing contributors because they're ignorant of the truths in the Founders' Constitution. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to come back into the next segment as we delve deeper into republicanism as the Founders intended it. Come on back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti federalists were predictively correct. And not only that, so were some of the Federalists from time to time. And we're going to kind of bring that to bear as we look at Republicanism and what that means now, from a clear understanding of the foundational basis. I kind of wanted to pick up from that last segment with the sad and sick commentary that our educational system has destroyed every nuance of what it means for republicanism. And now all they think is that even this whole idea of conservatism and all of that, you know what? That's phony baloney. That's not what the founders intended. It's a nice bunch of words, and we've heard a number of different people, from myself, from a lot of other pundits, from Dennis Prager, from even Pastor Doug Wilson and others, who touch on the fact that uh, what does it mean to take and have a republic secured, or what does it mean to differentiate from a political party perspective? And then where their clarifications are in vein of this commentary is that, what does it mean to be a conservative? What are you conserving? So it's like, we're not conserving anything, and those that call themselves conservatives hardly ever to never go back to the first source references, which I do on this program. That is the uniqueness of what we do here at Samuel Adams Returns, is to take and bring you those mirrors of history, not just reflective of what's happening, but also to bring you the truth as to how you should govern. I have to take the next couple minutes to uh, hammer this one home. What needs to be hammered home is every one of the loose lips out there, and I'm talking about all the pundits, all the Hannitys, all the big name people, all of the folks out there that are, screaming into their microphones or have hundreds of thousands of followers on their whatever social media channel or that. Very few to none ever take and try and bring you to a clear understanding of what it means to self govern from that foundational perspective. So many even think that call themselves, top notch conservatives, that, oh no, we need to do it this way now. Well, this way now doesn't work. And that's the whole confusion. And some of the this way now is, well, let me take you here before we jump into republicanism as what is a Republican government. I'll give you a hint that what it was here very clear about republicanism and that form of government was really nothing specific. This is in the first paragraph, is that if the clause of saying republicanism, it invoked a little alarm or comment when the Constitution was being drafted, debated, and ratified, that was owing more to a general agreement about the clause's intent than to any general agreement about the meaning of republicanism. In fact, the usage of the word Republican was as amorphous as it was common. So that means it was kind of loose fitting as it was a common term. But when we take and we look at the deeper component of that, what I want to take you to is a root of things. And that root of things goes to, oh gosh, one of the very beginning items of none other than what Bastiat had to say at the beginning of the law. And this is the whole thing, because what we have is all of these, even attorneys, judges, bureaucrats, they all give the excuse, oh, well, we're just functioning by the law. Well, here's what Bastiat says, and this is what the founders understood. So let me give this to you first. Bastiat wrote, and this was first published in 1850. And I want you to remember that Bastiat knows about socialism and he knows about communism, because here's a test. When did Karl Marx take and release, not just write, but when did he publish the Communist Manifesto? Let's see, Bastiat wrote the law in 1850. Oh, yes, Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1848. So Bastiat writes this with great knowledge and understanding, especially in Europe, where socialism and communism was coming into Europe with a vengeance. So Bastiat goes, and this is in the notes at samueladamsreturns.net. Bastiat wrote this: the law perverted, the law, and in its wake, all the collective forces of the nation. The law, I say, not only diverted from its proper direction, but made to pursue one entirely contrary. The law become the tool of every kind of avarice instead of being its check. The law guilty of that very iniquity which it is mission to punish. Truly, this is a serious fact, if it exists, and one to which I feel bound to call attention of my fellow citizens. We hold from God the gift that, as far as we are concerned, contains all others: life, physical, intellectual, and moral life. But life cannot support itself. He who has bestowed it has entrusted us with the care of supporting it, of developing it, and of perfecting it. To that end, He, being God, has provided us with a collection of wonderful faculties. He has plunged us into the midst of a variety of elements. It is by the application of our faculties to these elements that the phenomena of assimilation and of appropriation by which life pursues the circle that has been assigned to it are realized. Existence, faculties, assimilation, in other words, personality, liberty, property, this is man. And he continues talking about the perverseness of the law and how the law then becomes that which imposes legal plunder. Now, I wanted to set that basis because in republicanism, in the general ideas of the day of our Constitution, which I have spoken of over and over and over, the fundamentals are God's law first and foremost. We have to have something that holds us all together. And if it is not under those fundamentals of God's law, and as we know, John Adams, Madison, and others said this: the American Constitution of 1787, and thereby amended with the Bill of Rights, is only for a moral and religious/virtuous people. And without that, it's meaningless. It's meaningless. So when we look at law then becoming everything that perverted, according to Bastiat, folks, we got a real problem. And we're seeing that happening every single day. Everything what I just mentioned in the last segment in relationship to allowing government to force an experiment on people, allowing government, ladies and gentlemen, you should be taking to the streets all over the place. You should be telling your employers they better get their facts right because they are being deceived and they are accepting it because everywhere there is money, especially the Chi-Com money, is flowing all over the place. Oh, yeah, there's more money. I mean, our township, I was at a township meeting Monday night, and there is more money, COVID centered money, being distributed all the way down to the townships in Ohio. That means everywhere across the money. And you know what? They're being told that if you don't take it, somebody else will. You can't give the money back to the government. You can't tell the government to go stuff it in a box. The federal government is forcing all of this on every entity in America, and thereby using every entity and business and insurance company and everything that is there that comes under the purview and structure of the law to take and make us all slaves, which is not what republicanism was all about. Because as I began in the last segment and in the beginning of this segment as well, is that republicanism only works from the idea of a popular basis of government. It has to be understood. And that's what John Adams insisted in Novanglos in March 75, was that the government be bound by fixed laws which the people have a voice in making and a right to defend if they're good laws. And then also, as I wrote to my board of trustees, is that if a law violates the rights, our rights in Article 1 of the state constitution, it is their job, their duty to take and be critical of that law and to take and rebut it with everything that they have as the lesser magistrate. Now, the fundamental idea that is in here, and I'm once again seeing that we're not going to get through everything when it comes to republicanism, and when we look at what Benjamin Rush, when we look at what John Adams had to say, when we even look at Thomas Paine, their whole idea of what maintained or gave us that broad brush definition of republicanism is that we were not a monarchy. We rejected everything around monarchy, and that absolute republicanism is an absolute rejection of monarchy. But Thomas Jefferson's ideas were a little bit different. And as you go through and you read this, and some of the things that they did there in Virginia in particular, when they went in and said, because of not having this monarchy, they're able to restructure the law. And in restructuring that, he singled out bills that were repealing the entail and abolishing a lot of different areas that didn't make sense in general. But one of the areas that he looked at is to ensure that from the Northwest Ordinance, we would have Republican forms of government in Ohio and every other state that came forward. We're going to jump into the principled ideas that were in republicanism as we come back into this next segment. But I want to make sure that we end this with understanding that the republicanism was the dependence and popular devoration were necessary to proclaim a constitution in conformity with the principles of Republican government. It may sound like you're going in circles, but it's not. And we'll come back in the third segment to kind of close the loop a little bit on this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists were predictively, absolutely correct. As we delve into more about republicanism, not a Republican Party, because a Republican Party is void, is non-existent in respect to what it means to hold to the foundational truths of republicanism. And hey, you know what? Forget about the Democrat Party because they're communist. There's no, they're not even socialist. They're communist. And what we have going on with the Biden administration is driving us into bankruptcy and slavery to China and all the other oligarchs, which that was a problem. Two problems that come forward in this introduction to republicanism in the founders' constitution. One of them was on looking at the size of a government. The argument in there was that the Federalists were vindication. They were looking, both Hamilton and Madison were real contributors to this idea that the argument was, especially from the anti-Federalist perspective, and a number of others during the state conventions on ratification, that a Republican form of government only works in small settings. And they saw that in Greece it went haywire, Italy it went haywire. In fact, the quote here is that not largeness but small lay at the root of domestic turmoil and sedition that made the petty republics of Greece and Italy horrible and disgusting to contemplate. And then they were also giving examples about Western Massachusetts and Rhode Island and what was happening during that period of time. Now, that argument meant that how do you operate a republicanism, a Republican form of government, a representative form of government is really what they were discussing. How does that work in small or large arenas? And to that extent, what we see today is that we're not represented in Congress because of the fears of these early founders in talking about what could happen and how would things develop in the idea of even political science, and what would that mean in taking and describing how will we secure our liberties within this idea of progressive of what we have going on with republicanism. Now, what is interesting is that in taking and pulling this all together, some of the happily, what they say is modern improvements now made it possible for the enlightened friends of liberty, we're talking that period, to stand forth as republicanism. Of those progressive developments in political science, none was more critical than the discovery that the enlargement of the sphere is found to lessen the insecurity of private rights. And that was Madison in what he wrote. And then, in part, this lessening would come about in a large republic almost as a matter of course, thanks to the barriers to easy collusion posed by distance, time, and heterogeneity. In part, it might become about through a properly devised process of elections, as will most certainly extract from the mass of society the purest and noblest characters which it contains. And in and of itself, however, the extended republic might well favor protracted misrepresentation rather than the refinement and enlargement of popular views. Nature had still to be perfected by political art. With cool self assurance, the proponents of the Constitution would point to the document as an unparalleled exemplar of the art that was needed. Well, all that sounded great. But in this modern time of 2020 and 2021, we know that the perversion of the laws, the perversion across the whole nation of the electoral system, and the perversion of education has knocked down every element that even Madison and Hamilton were proposing as to how to secure the republic under the Constitution. Instead, what we have is exactly what I always talk about under the Kozak plan. We have the enemy in the bureaucracies, we have the enemy in the educational system, and now we have the enemy in elective offices at every level, all the way to the presidency of the United States. Now, with all of that, it is interesting to see that the potentials, the groundwork, the fundamentals to secure the republic are still in place. The Constitution has not been amended to the extent that it is not recoverable. What we have, though, is the perversion of the judicial system, the perversion of the law, perverted laws that are being passed by state and national legislatures that are taking and enslaving us. And a lot of it comes to this when we look at the problem of republicanism, and I'm going to read it because it's that simple. The problem of commerce. This should make sense to everyone, clearly. And here's what it says here in that introduction on republicanism in chapter 4. Even with the extended republic temporarily secure and orthodox Republican leaders in office, that means, in reading earlier, that you would elect people that what? You'd elect people of the purest and noblest character. We sure do not have that in office. So, once again, what we're reading from these foundational truths are almost void because we don't have the Republican leaders in office that need to be there. And I don't mean Republican Party. I remember it's Republicanism leaders. Would the Americans' zeal for a commercial republic prove the undoing of both republic and Republicans? Good question. I think we have. We're seeing that right now. It is tempting, but unhistorical to treat this concern as a quaint or irrelevant atavism in a people as zealously commercial as the Americans. It was one thing to recognize the inevitable prominence of commerce in American life, as did Jefferson in a letter to George Washington on the 15th of March, 1784, John Adams' letter to John Jay on 6th of December, 1785, and Hamilton in what he wrote, and you can see it in chapter 7 here in this book. It was another matter to assess accurately the benefit and cost of that development. Following Montesquieu, number 2, and Hume, who I don't like, number 3, some Americans could recognize and welcome the ways in which commerce would soften men's harshness and hatred, creating bonds within and among states. You can see number 32 here, which is a letter, which is also Agrippa. So that's referring to all of the other resources that are here in this section. Hamilton was loath to credit such pacific expectations. though, of course, this is no way diminished his ardor for the promotion of commerce and manufacturing. Much more vexing were the probable effects of those developments upon the habits, tastes, and concerns of a self-governing people. Republicanism presupposes a people who care about the res publica, the public things. We don't care about the public things anymore, okay? Commerce changes the focus of individuals' vision. Manufacturing permits while encouraging the indulgence of private gratifications. And a life cut off from the soil is, to that extent, a life of increased dependency on the wills of other men. Are you getting this? Are you understanding the predictiveness of all of this in relationship to where we are today? All of those minions out there that are beating up on us that do not believe in having to take an experimental jab. This is what it is right here. Go read it for yourself in the notes at samueladamsreturns.net for today's program. And it continues on. You're dependent now on the will of other men, all the oligarchs that are out there. Okay? Could one still speak of Republican citizens when contemplating merchants, for which the mere spot they stand on does not constitute so strong an attachment as that from which they draw their gains? So, in other words, property, private, intellectual, personal property doesn't matter except for what's happening in the stock market, what's happening in economics, and what I always say, happening in economy over liberty. Oh, Jefferson to Horatio Gates Spafford, 17 March 1817, cited in the papers, talked about that. Would the avarice that set man or men in motion leave them the taste or energy for pursuing the public's concerns? Recognizing those problems was the first step towards trying to cope with them, and there were, among the American founders of Republican government, those who were intent on facing that challenge. And now you'd have to go back to how do you maintain in chapter 18, which I talked about, republicanism. How is it that we maintain it? It's up to you. It is up to you. It is up to taking back our educational system, first and foremost. It is up to standing up against those who would push, who would foist, who would demand that you violate your conscience, that you violate the truths of God. Those that are perverting the law, as Bastiat says it, those that have established legal plunder because of commerce, economy over liberty. Where are you? Where are you in all of that? It comes down to, will you, as Bastiat said at the very beginning that I wrote, at the very beginning of his book, The Law, will you understand what it means to be a human, a man, or a woman based on God's principles of what that means? Or, as it says here, the problem of commerce being that of now you are dependent, and your increased dependency on the wills of other men, of all of the oligarchs, of all of those that are pressing on you to violate your conscience, to violate your God. No, not me. I stand on my God first, and then I stand on the principles of constitutionalism, republicanism, and that which Sam Adams did as well. Come on back next week because we have a lot more to cover when it comes to understanding all of these various truths, of understanding republicanism and populism in the context of founders' original intent. See you next week.